promise it's going to get better.
You were.
So, so the reality is that sometimes, we tell our clients, oh, we got a deal or whatever. And sellers, I learned this a long time ago too. I tell my sellers, or I have historically, nobody will work with me anymore because you guys are too good and you take them all, which is great. That's the way it's supposed to be. But when I work with my sellers, I said, listen, either we agree that we're going to negotiate verbally and our word is our bond, or, and some people don't even do this. They don't, I think Pete would disagree with this, which is great because we'll get some dissension here. Or we wait until we get signatures, but we communicate that. So we say, listen, we're not, no deal is done until we sign. Okay. So we're going to entertain all offers until the point of signature, in which case some realtors will freak out and it will make them crazy. But the thing is, if you're honest and you're sincere in your dealings, I don't think anybody can say anything. You can just say, hey, we are going to entertain, we think these terms work. We have the intention of executing this contract, but we're entertaining any and all offers until we get it signed. And I'll even tell the other side, put us on a reasonably tight leash because I want you to have the expectation that this is the way, these are the rules of engagement. And it's really important to do that with your seller because I wore egg on my face that one time where we verbally agreed, and then we get another offer and the seller comes back to me and says, hey, I want this 10 grand. And, it's too much where I can make the difference. I can't even make the difference because it's too much money. And I have to go back to the other realtor and say, oh, just kidding. We're not going to honor our word. We're horrible human beings. And I couldn't live with myself doing business like that. So I said, listen, we've got to either say we're going to honor our word and our word is our bond, or we're going to wait until the signatures. And I think, Pete, why don't you chime in on how you say, because you say it really smart. You have a really smart way of how you handle this.
Well, I don't know that I would say it. We have changed our ways through the years. We will never tell a client ever that an offer is, quote, coming in. It's ridiculous. It just gets their hopes up. And then you got to backtrack. We will never, ever tell another client, even if we have all of the terms in writing and it's on the way, and I just sent it to your email, until we see it in our email and we are forwarding it to them, we do not disclose that we have an offer or any interest at all, because you are just setting yourself up for a more disappointed client and more hopes up. And if you've ever sold your house, just try it. It sucks. This person's interested. That white guy's going to write an offer. They're coming in from out of town. This person. It's just best to tell your clients that you have an offer. You've just emailed it to them, and here are kind of the cliff notes. But you want them to read it over thoroughly, and you can go through it with them. That's it. So we don't ever communicate anything in writing. And agents that talk to me and say, "Oh no, they're golden." Don't you? You love to hear that. Those guys are golden. Their pre-approvals tell me if they're golden. Proof of funds tell me if they're golden. Agents don't tell me anything about people that they just met 2 weeks ago and they've never looked in their pocket. So I just think, and when we verbally negotiate, and we do, like I did yesterday with one, she said, well, we really wanted to keep the washer and dryer. And I said, okay, we can counter that. But when we counter that, and remember, they can retract their offer at any time. 5 minutes from now, they could send an email, they could call me and retract their offer. So how much is that washer and dryer worth? Well, it's 7 years old. Well, guess what? You're getting a new washer and dryer. You're going to go get one in Nebraska. You're going to love it. So we don't ever talk about that. That's what's changed. Also, what has changed is I think you need to put your buyers into a position. Why would you ever write an offer on a house and give them till next Thursday? I mean, that's just, your client could see, this is the house of their dreams. They could see their house of their dreams tomorrow. They could see their the next house of their dreams the next day. So I just think we're not being jackasses by putting 8-hour, response times. You can still hold our offer. We can still accept it Monday, but I'm not going to put in this market, it's funny how buyers have absolutely no power and they're the ones with the money. So I just think you have to kind of put your buyers into a position of power. I think everybody thinks my buyer's not at power at all. No, I think you can say, here's an offer. You can understand my people need a house by Monday. We are going to give you 8 hours. If you love the offer and don't think you're going to get anything better than that, accept it. A seller can retract an offer, a buyer can retract an offer, and agents can do a lot of talking amongst one another if they'd like to. Or they can tell their clients, both buyers and sellers, time kills all deals. Mary Ray Wolf would tell me that all the time. Time kills all deals. Time kills all deals. So, you know what I mean? That's what we push. We're not trying to push our clients to do things. But if you really want this house, then go in guns blazing, give them time, and know that tomorrow we might find a better one. We just don't know. So
No.
I think, that's what we got sick of, is waiting till next Thursday and then finding out you lost by $2,000 after you look in the paper. And, you took yourself off the market for 5 days.
And I think that's a great point and strategy that Pete taught me the other day, or maybe it was a month ago or whatever it was. Time goes so fast. And I think was this last point is, when people are holding offers and you write an offer on Thursday and they, and they're going to hold them till Monday or Sunday, his strategy is, I'm going to write it with 8 hours. And I don't think I'm necessarily, it's not to incentive, sometimes people put, oh, well, if we have the right to accept an offer, of course, they always had that right, but they'll put that in the MLS notes. It's not necessarily to try to only entice them to take the offer. It's also to give their buyer the freedom to do whatever they want to do. Now, to Pete's point, you could also rescind that offer, but he is able to kind of kill two birds with one stone. Maybe they'll take the offer because it has a shorter time frame. And why give them the opportunity to hold it till Sunday? And maybe more importantly, it affords the buyer the right to go ahead and buy another house in the event that Sunday, that they don't want to wait till Sunday for that review period and the house of their dreams, to use his terminology, comes to fruition.
Hey, Tom.
So, yeah.
Can you, so we can, I'm not trying to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I want to touch on several different things. So
yeah, keep going. I'm sorry. We got bogged down on that.
It's okay. And Pete, those were great comments, and they will stand the test of time. And that's the things that I think we have to teach. But I would like you to summarize for a point of best practice in just the 2 or 3 points of the best practice to for all of us to do at all times when we are going back and forth in contracts. So the one thing I heard you say, to get you started on that, is immediately get something back in writing and text the agent. So those are like 2 things. Like I've texted you, I text them that I've sent this to your mailbox or whatever. So a couple of like always do practices to not get in that position.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things Pete mentioned too is don't, in this market, particularly if you're representing a buyer, but also if you're representing a seller, try to not let them get hung up on stupid things that you're going to have to, that's a counter that requires another signature.
Get everything out of the contract.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. You're chasing $500 worth of washers and dryers, and the person's $36,000 over the asking price, and you're going to dink around with this. Sign it.
Yeah.
Because it might have come over, where it's, $36,000 will make up all the appraisal, shortage. And oh, by the way, on this $264,000 house, our earnest deposit is $15,000, and you're, and there's no inspection contingency, and you're chasing $400 on a used washer and dryer.
Exactly.
I mean, sometimes we assume that people have general business acumen, that this person could be, a physicist, biologist. They don't know anything about it, and so we can't tell them what to do from the standpoint it's their money, but we can certainly instruct them as to what the cost benefit is for their decision. So that's the other thing I would do when we're informing clients. We need to talk in terms of probability, and we need to talk in terms of cost benefit. Now, if they say that they want to chase a $400 washer and dryer after you inform them of the cost benefit, and they make that decision, then your conscience is clear. But it is our job. We say, well, it's their money, they've got to make. No, it's our job to instruct them. We get paid a lot of money to make those decisions. So what I would say, Carol, is always provide cost benefit to the best of your ability within reasonable realms of depth based on what you know to be true, and probability. Real estate is a culmination of different, from the standpoint of negotiating real estate, is the culmination of different probabilities. And experience is an incredible teacher, and we should take that experience, and if we don't have it, we should reach out to those that do, and utilize our experience to come up with levels of probability. And I always try to instruct people that I like to make decisions based on probability, because how else are we going to make decisions? Right. So we outline the issues, we explain it to them, and we encourage them to make decisions based on probability. So that would be the biggest thing that I would say.
All right. Inspections, pre-inspections, verbiage around that, and IE. So the direction that I'm looking for here. In our new agent training, we did inspections this week with that amazing, by the way, video that Don Grimshaw did that's in our library. 2 videos. If you guys have not watched that, and you kind of think about like, what are all the things that I need to be aware of in inspections, go watch it. Don did an amazing job on both of them. And then our new agents watch that, and then we have them on to the mentor class on Wednesday. But we talked about that. And a lot of the things that came up was, well, what if they don't want to be without some kind of inspection? And what I've found is that we're getting a lot more positive response when we are defining what we mean by inspection, specifically for major items over $1,000. But then there's the question, is that everything together over $1,000, or is that one thing? Or so I just want you to speak to how to be specific, no matter how many words it takes you, to protect yourself and your client.
So from a buyer's perspective,
that's strictly from the buyer's perspective. In order to show good faith of mitigating risk to the seller, which is kind of what our goal is in every offer, is to give them as much risk mitigation as possible, and at the same time make the buyer side happy. So with words.
Yeah.
Words.
Yeah, totally understand.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say about that, it's concept, not necessarily, I'll get to words really quickly, but is that you have to think in terms of exactly what you said, risk mitigation. So the first thing we have to think about is from a seller's perspective is, we know we're going to get a whole bunch of money for this house in this market, theoretically, presumably. So how are we going to get it to the finish line? Right. So the first thing we're thinking about is, what's the probability that we're going to close at this outrageous price? Right. That's the forethought of everybody. So from the standpoint of protecting the buyer and actually getting the house, so those two competing interests, first thing I would say is use that addendum that we have, that limits the scope of the inspection, because the way the contract's written right now is it's a due diligence period, which is of course different than the old OABR form. It's the Great Plains, purchase agreement basically says, that they could be held at bay for 18 days. I mean, that's essentially what could happen, which I'm not necessarily a big proponent of that language. So we did develop that independent addendum that allows you to identify specifically what inspections you're looking for. So for example, Carol, if I am worried about the roof and I'm worried about the HVAC because it's 28 years old and who knows if it has a cracked heat exchanger in the furnace, then I'm going to isolate those items and get to major mechanicals, because of course, every time you're narrowing things, you're providing an opportunity for less exposure for the seller.
Mhm.
If the seller knows that they just had the furnace serviced and it got a clean bill of health, and they know that they got their roof replaced a year and a half ago and it's still under warranty, they probably have a greater level of comfort in regard to those two items being evaluated. So being surgical in the sense of what you want. So for example, for terminology standpoint, um, purchaser shall evaluate through a licensed contractor the following major components, and their inspection shall be limited, and any repair requests and or replacement shall be limited to the following: roof, HVAC, plumbing. And that affords them the opportunity to mitigate the seller's risk, because they're not gonna necessarily put them through the ringer on a hangnail. Because the other reason why you want to do that, by the way, is you want to make sure that somebody's not test driving the house, right? If you put something out there, let's say somebody puts a $40,000 over the asking price out there. In a lot of circumstances, I'm dealing with them every day, they get buyer's remorse, right? And then they have this aggregated inspection that just says anything and everything. And they say, oh, well, we don't like the way the settlement of the concrete is here. And the seller says, no, I'll fix that. We'll fix that. We want your $40,000 over the asking price. The buyer doesn't have to accept that repair. They just walk. So it has as much to do about, I think these inspections have the concerns for sellers or listing agents has as much to do about their concern about buyer's remorse and them thinking twice about whether they can get that money gathered up for that appraisal shortage than it has to do with any repairs that are actually going to be requested.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Yeah.
I would just say that.
Another question that I have around that, and these are questions that I gather from other people asking questions on the other 6 things that I'm on in a week, is your feelings about the statement for buyer's information only. Because, and then as a caveat to that, okay, buyer's information only, inspection happens, they really don't like it, and now they are starting to ask for things. Talk about that.
So for buyer's information purposes only is a really cute tool for buyer's agents, similar to escalation clauses.
Yeah.
They are not worth the paper they're written on or the ink in the pen, because they mean nothing. The problem with writing it from a buyer stamp, it can be a reasonable tool. The problem is for buyer's information purposes only. Well, what does that mean?
Exactly.
That language in and of itself, what the hell does that mean? I mean, there's an argument from the other side. Now, I don't think it would get through binding arbitration this way, but the argument could be, well, it's for your information. You said you were going to accept the house. It's for your information. Now, so if you didn't check the inspection box or the inspection contingency, and you put down for buyer's information purpose, we're going to inspection for buyer's information purposes only, and you didn't check the box, I don't think you have the right to ask for repairs contractually. And now, nobody would probably do that, right? But if you did do it, it's a problem. You might say, well, we're not going to say that we want the contingency. We're just going to say it's for our information, but we can get out. If you do not check the box and you don't define it in that paragraph, in my opinion, you don't have the right to ask for repairs. If I'm the listing agent and somebody says, oh, it's for buyer's information purposes only, they're not going to ask for any repairs. That's like somebody saying, I'm honest. Don't trust anybody who says they're honest. If they have to say they're honest, they're not honest. When people put for buyer's information only, to me, it's a red flag, because it's a technique and a strategy, but it holds no, remember, the seller doesn't have to acknowledge or repair anything anyway. So how does it move the needle? And it doesn't move the needle at all. When somebody says, well, we're not going to ask for anything. Well, good. We weren't going to repair anything anyway. So you can ask all you want. We got 3 backup offers. So we weren't going to repair anything anyway. So when people put that, to me, I think it holds absolutely zero credibility or merit.
How
My
do you
personal
counter
opinion.
that? What do you do with that? How do you counter it?
I would counter it this way. I would either say no inspection, or I would say purchaser agrees there shall be no inspections, or I would say, to your point, Carol, I might say something like this. I might say, which you alluded to earlier, I might say, in the event that that there are any items that the professional home inspector provides the summary, and that summary entails any items that contain material defects, the seller and purchaser shall mutually agree to how to handle any items that exceed $1,000, $5,000. However, purchaser agrees to accept any and all repairs that culminate to up to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Now, the problem is that there's some subjectivity in the dollar amount, but at least it sets an expectation about where people should be from a mindset perspective. And you could even go on to say, in the event that there are repairs that shall be required by the purchaser, any and all repairs shall be substantiated by 2 contractors to determine their value. So that way they can't say, you can't have somebody come in and say, oh, you know what? See that crack in the sidewalk? We've got to rip out the entire driveway and that's $8,000. Well, okay. I mean, it's like the provision and I know I get a little bit off track here.
No,
but
this is like good information.
It's like the provision that's in the new purchase agreement that says, in the event that there's hail or wind or fire, and the adjuster comes in and says, you got to repair all this stuff, then you have to do that. Or a contractor, it even says a contract. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? It should be whatever the parties agree to. It shouldn't be, these contracts should not try to substantiate the spirit of the negotiation. They should clarify any item within the negotiation as it relates to law, but it shouldn't be part of the negotiation. It shouldn't overreach, in my opinion, and that's what that paragraph does, in my opinion.
That's great. I'd love to see that in writing, and I think probably other people would also, but I think that is something that is done quite often. Anybody want to chime in here? Do you see it coming over on when you have the listing? Are you writing it as buyer's agent for informational purposes only? Somebody chime in. April, you get a lot of buyer contracts. Are you utilizing that in any way?
Yeah, for sure. And I had to step out there for a minute. So I didn't quite catch everything Tom said about the points. But when I do it, and I do it for, I'd say right now, probably 99% of all of my buyers, across the board, because, they all want a home inspection and, they put it in a couple of times and they very quickly lose. That's a losing point of their offers. So then the whole informational purposes thing only tends to come out very quickly. And so I kind of approach it. I'm a big fan of framing things. I like to frame my wording. So I always approach it from a verbial standpoint of, buyers to have home inspection for buyers' informational purposes only, with buyers retaining the right to accept the house in as-is condition or retain the right to dissolve the purchase agreement and retain the earnest deposit. So I always frame it, or I do it in some place of, they retain the right to accept the house in as-is condition with the exception of the roof, if there's roof repairs that are called, or, I try to put something, I think. But then the framing sense of things, because I always like to put that framing in there. I always put and I write this right into contingency section C, and maybe I shouldn't, but I try to put a kind spin on it of, the home inspection is not meant to intimidate Rather, it is a good business practice meant to keep, smooth waters in the transaction or buyers from getting cold feet. I try to put some sort of a spin on it that gets the sellers thinking, oh, well, hey, maybe this is just a good business practice that's going to prevent cold feet. And maybe if we take the other offer, they will get cold feet a couple weeks in because they didn't have one. So I try to frame the wording a little bit around that.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else want some feedback on this?
Carol, can you hear me?
I can.
One of the things that I've been starting to do is just do like kind of an offer letter from me, kind of summarizing what our offer is. And then that's where I put, like what April was saying, I put that verbiage in that little letter. And just state like, hey, he really did a thorough look over of the house. He doesn't have any main concerns. He just feels that it's such a big investment that he wants to have a professional come out and tell him that he's all good to go. And this is just, he's the kind of guy that just needs to be able to sleep at night. And I put that in the offer letter. And I actually have my buyer's initial off on that letter as well. But it's just kind of a good place where you're not, writing all that legal language. Yeah. You're kind of softening it. And, a lot of times, especially with these buyers, I mean, this guy I have now, it's not even a first time buyer, but he needs somebody else to tell him it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a fact, he's the kind of guy that he will sleep better. And when something goes wrong, it's not going to be a big deal because, Mr. Inspector said the house was fine. But if he doesn't have that, he's, nervous Nelly type. And I think that's what a lot of these buyers are doing. They get it, but they just need someone else to say it's going to be okay. And that's what I try to also relay to my sellers. Unfortunately, when you have 12 or 15 offers, you don't need to take the inspections. But at the end of the day, they're not that bad. And you can always say no, and you could have always said no. So it's all good.
Opportunity right now than a month ago, 2 months ago. I want to make sure that Tom gets to the language of pre-occupancy, but I would highly suggest that if anyone is writing an offer and needs to utilize that verbiage or the spirit of that verbiage, to either reach out to any one of the pros here who obviously have a hold on what that verbiage would be. So, because we learn from each other. So I think that would be great. If anybody wants to share that would be good too. Just anything that will protect us. So Tom, I want to go back to you, and then we can finish this conversation with one question before we go to pre-occupancy, and is from who had that question? Stephanie had the question of, is this inspection addendum available for Iowa agents? The new inspection addendum, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can use that the concept of it in either state. I don't think there's a stereotype.
Stephanie, was that your question? Yeah. Okay. Great. And then, so Tom, can you speak to? This is another cloudy area. Is pre-occupancy, actually post-occupancy, providing post-occupancy to the seller more than pre. I think pre is pretty much. I don't know anybody that does that anymore. But particularly post-occupancy, because that's such a high piece of the power that the sellers have right now is this is the only date that I want to close, and I want to be able to be in the house for X amount of days after, or a month after, or 2 months after. And so can you speak to that?
Yeah, just one point of clarification on not to hedge or sound patronizing. I don't disagree that for information purposes can work. I'm just saying from a seller's perspective, I don't put, but there's a lot of things that I would do as take escalation clauses. I know that's not what we're talking about, but I think they're great for buyers. I think they're horrible for sellers. I think the same. Information only, bad for sellers, good for buyers. That's my point. And so I just want a point of clarification. I'm not disagreeing with April. I think she's right, and I think it's great to write, but I wouldn't. But I don't want to be on the receiving end of it, April. That's all I'm saying. But no, it's a great point. So post occupancy. So there has been a ton of post occupancy, which of course was never a thing. I mean, never a thing. And now, of course, it's the thing. And what I always tell people is two big things you have to remember about post occupancy is who fixes the broken stuff and who carries the insurance. So that's 98% of your problems. Okay. Now, normally, if it's a financed offer, and there's so much cash, that's the other thing that screws the stuff up. We got sideways on one because it was cash and because if you're buying something for cash, right, you don't have any obligation to have insurance on it.
Yeah.
Right. So of course your lender is going to say, where the hell's your insurance? You got to have the insurance come out at the closing statement. But if you're cash and you're whatever reason, realtor misses it, whatever, so you have to make sure. Normally the buyer would hold the property insurance, right? Now I would make sure that when you're a buyer, that your insurance carrier knows that you're not going to be occupying the house. People are like, well, I don't want to say that or whatever, but you don't want to have a problem where your policy, there's a glitch in your policy, and since you're not the occupant at that time, that your policy, you need a rider, either a renter rider or whatever, because you don't want to have the thing burned down and they say, well, did you burn it down? Oh no, the old seller burned it down. Well, it sounds like it needs to be his insurance now. And of course you want the post occupant, the seller, to carry renter's insurance and liability insurance. Because what happens if something happens and it's not the seller's fault at all, and some event occurs and it ruins all their contents and they don't have renter's insurance? Who's responsible for the seller's post occupancy contents? I don't know. Contract silent to it, right? So you have to identify those specific things. That's really important. The other thing is that you have to make sure that you know which party is responsible for repairs, and those are identified. So what I always say is, if I'm a buyer, if I'm representing a buyer and we have a post occupancy situation, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, look, if there's any negligence whatsoever, and there's a repair or a replacement that has to occur due to the seller's negligence, then that's on the seller. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify, we have really expensive houses that go post occupancy these days. You have to make sure that who's going to mow the grass, who's going to service the pool, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, who's going to be responsible for the dock. All these things that seem like they're no big deal until they are, right? So all these nuances need to get identified. And what I usually think is fair, kind of equitable, is that if there's any routine maintenance items that need to occur, that the seller would do those things kind of in the normal course of business. If they're going to occupy for 6 months and it's time for the HVAC to be serviced, then that's probably on their dime. But if the air conditioner goes out and it was due to no fault of the seller that's post occupying, then why would that not be the buyer's responsibility? Because they're the ones that are going to benefit from the air conditioner moving forward, presumably when they occupy the house. So I guess back to insurance and repairs. That's 98% of it. You want to get that right. And that sometimes takes some horse trading, but you need to make sure that the policies are correctly written from insurance perspective. You need to make sure that the seller has canceled their property casualty policy, presumably when the purchaser has their policy, because what sometimes happens in property casualty is if a house is duplicitously underwritten or insured, and a claim takes place or there's a loss, then the insurance companies fight each other and don't want to pay it. They say, oh no, the other guy's got to pay it, and you have trouble getting paid. And so you got to make sure that one, believe it or not, it's not better to have two. You want one or the other. So presumably buyer has a homeowner's property casualty insurance policy. Seller has a liability policy, because what happens if somebody slips off the dock and slices their head open and dies? Whose responsibility is that? So if it was because the dock was wet, because the seller is a post occupant then you want a liability policy for a couple $1 million, so they don't try to go after you as the purchaser because it's your property, right? So all these things are important because especially when you deal with these really high expensive homes, which is it's very common to have post occupancy, not because they need the money to buy their next house, but because they want to transition. Maybe they're building a house or whatever. You know all the circumstances. But does that answer the question, Carol? I know you want specific language, but what I would say is let's talk about the concept. And then when you come up, here's the thing I'll tell you guys. When you come up with what the terms are going to be, call me and I'll help you. If you want work with the language, call me and I'll help you through the language. It's just real hard, Carol, to give specific language on.
The biggest thing that you talked about, two biggest things that you talked about that I think are things to think about, and this is particularly in what we need to be able to write an offer, because the sample house that we're going to give to people, the seller may say, we can't move out until a certain date. So how am I as the buyer's agent going to address that in my offer? That's what I wanted you to say is talk about is you use the post occupancy agreement, right? And you have to be specific about the things that are important, which are the insurance, what kind of insurance and liabilities and things like that that are required in it. So I think some of that's spoken to already. Kathy Shunk is asking a question here too.
Yeah, she had a good comment about home warranty. It's a great point. Yeah.
Home warranty.
Probably wise to have a home warranty in place. That's a really great, very cerebral thought that Kathy had. That could mitigate risk for both parties.
Right.
It's a very good thought, Kathy.
Yeah.
I agree with her 100%.
And so we're 2 minutes from being like in our time limit here. Any last thoughts, Tom, or any questions that you guys have that you haven't asked along the way? We'll stay here for as long as you have questions and things to ask.
Sure. Absolutely. April, I can be here as long as
April,
anybody.
You're muted.
Oh.
You're trying to talk.
No,
Okay.
sorry. I did actually have a question going back to home inspections. And I've got to run. I've got an appointment here in a minute. As far as the home inspection, I am seeing where there's some local inspection companies who are offering kind of a pre-inspection for buyers where they can come walk through prior to putting the offer in. I just got an email about that from one company. I think I saw a second one. If your buyer wants to do something like that, do you need permission from the sellers to allow that inspector into the house when you go in through your showing?
Yeah, my first of all, I think it's an incredible strategy, and I've used it as much as 5 years ago. I was using it because it gives the buyer peace of mind, and it relieves the contingency for the seller. First and foremost, I think it's a great strategy. I believe that you do have to get acknowledgement from the seller, because remember, they're going to be assessing their major components, which means that there's some intrusive nature to what they're doing. So if they're not going to touch anything, maybe not. They could just be a consultant, a third party. If they are going to open or touch anything, like open the furnace or get on the roof or do anything that could be even remotely construed as intrusive, I think that you absolutely need permission from the seller. And honestly, I would probably get permission even if they're only going to walk it. Personally.
What would that be like an addendum that's done that everyone signs off on, or just a simple email that goes out to the listing agent that just states, hey, this is what's going on. Can you get me permission directly from your sellers?
Yeah, I think an email is adequate because, of course, at that particular juncture, there's no agreement between the parties. Right. So what I would suggest from a practical, kind of pragmatic standpoint is that you just get acknowledgement that that's going to occur and acceptance of that and the scope of it. So if it's going to be a full house inspection, I would say that. I would say seller acknowledges that the purchaser is going to participate in an inspection for the purposes of determining whether or not they're going to make an offer on the home. This inspection shall be within the confines of a traditional home inspection. It will be performed by X party, and seller shall acknowledge that this person will be there from the times of X to Y, and this will be the scope of their inspection.
Okay.
And then have the seller acknowledge that, or the seller listing agent acknowledge that.
Awesome.
Hey,
Thank you.
Tom. Hey, Tom, I think you also have to mention that the seller doesn't want to see anything about this inspection.
Mhm.
I don't know, I don't mind letting someone in, but I guess some people hold, how should I say this? Some people hold home inspectors in higher regard than I do. So anyway, as a
Yeah,
seller,
yeah, no,
I wouldn't care if they go through. I just don't want them to be running through the streets talking about it.
Yeah, so you could, yeah, so it's a good point. So if that was a concern, it's a fair point, Pete. So if that was a concern, you could go on to say, any and all findings by the inspector shall be provided to the purchaser. These findings shall not be shared with the seller or the listing agent by their request. And all items shall remain confidential between the inspector and the purchaser, potential purchaser. You could do those things. You could set those expectations. Now, if you're going to put those types of expectations, then I would make it a one pager and get it signed off on. If you are setting behavioral expectations upon the parties, then I would make it a contract. If you're just asking for permission to evaluate it, and of course you could say verbally, Pete, too, which of course that we don't want to see the findings, and that any and all findings should need to be held by the parties, not shared with the listing agent and or the seller.
And you can do that with any contract, by the way. So if they take
Correct.
A or C and they say they're going to take it or leave it, we always say, if you're leaving it, I don't care. I don't care what you found. We're going to put it back on the market. We don't care. So, and that's a good way to send a message to the buyer that you're not fixing anything. You know what I mean? I don't even want to see it. It's for your information. The seller doesn't want to see it. You either take A or C, and that's the only addendum we sign. And that's a good way to send a message to a buyer that these guys aren't messing around. This isn't just because you know how it is, Tom. Tom said it best yesterday at the luncheon. He said, Pete, the day the seller gets the offer is the best day, and every day after that goes downhill. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to get any better for the seller after that offer comes in.
It's true. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's true for our sellers. And it doesn't get a hell of a lot better for the buyers right now either. So basically everybody's pissed off.
Yeah.
There you go.
Basically, you find something, you feel like it's the prize, and then you find out it's the booby prize as it goes along. So
Yeah. Look at how stoic. That got nothing. Crickets on that. God.
Okay, so thanks you guys very much for joining us, and thank you, Tom, so much. You always rouse great conversations, and for everybody else who contributed. These conversations could go on for hours and hours, so we'll do them again. And this particular subject, verbiage in contracts, seems to not ever have an end, Tom. So
I know. No, it doesn't. And I learned so much every time. I learned like 4 things today.
yeah.
One thing on escalations, and I promise I won't say another word. There's escalations coming over that say, they're unlimited. That's the new cute thing. That's the new shiny thing. And then it goes on to say, oh, but just kidding. We have to approve whatever number it is that you come back and say is the highest.
Yeah.
That is nothing more than last look, folks. It's just giving that person last look. Do not fall for that as the listing agent. It is smoke and mirrors. All you're doing is giving that particular buyer last look. You're limiting your potential. And another thing about escalation clauses is don't entertain them, in my opinion, as a seller. Don't entertain them. Counter them out as a significant part of the contract. Always ask for highest and best. We just had one in Dundee last week. We got $11,000 more. If we would have entertained the escalation clause, we would have got $11,000 less for our people. So I really feel strongly about that. If you do it and you disagree with me, I'd love to hear it. Send me an email. Let's talk about it. But I really feel strongly about that.
That's why I
That's
left
it.
it. That was last on my list because I'm already very clear about how you feel about escalation clauses.
Yeah, yeah.
Also adapted the same attitude. So you got me there. So
All right. Well, I don't know that I'm right, but if you say it often and loud, Carol, sometimes it works. I don't know.
Yeah.
It
The other
doesn't mean
one-
I'm right, but the
The
loudest
other
person
one
wins, right?
that we're seeing is no number in for the purchase price, like you fill it out, like, which is the
That's-
same thing as an escalation clause with no end. It's so stupid. So
I know I'm getting old because everything irritates the hell out of me.
me too.
I don't understand that. I mean, first of all, that's not a valid contract because you have to have you have to have consideration for a contract to be valid. So
Yeah.
that's not even a valid.
And there's
contract.
like no particular brains around that at all. So all right, you guys, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
As always, and I know what, send me well, a lot of people have dropped off already, but I'm going to send out an email that says who wants to participate in the top offer. So please respond so that we can have something to talk about next week, because otherwise we won't have an ATA. Just like that. All right.
Yeah, that's going to be really cool. I'm excited for that. I'm going to be out of town, but I'm dialing in because I think that's going to be so cool. I can't wait to see how that works
Good.
out.
You need to come up with a prize, Tom. So
We're going to think of something cool. I won't because I'm so boring,
maybe
but
the whole
somebody
team
will.
will get to go out to lunch with you. I think that would
Oh
be.
my God. We're trying to give them something that's good, Carol.
Well, then you can bring presents.
That might do it. That works for my kids.
I think an hour of your attention, it has so much value that.
Well, you're nice to say that. That you might be you and my dog, but there you go.
Okay, bye guys.
All right, guys. Have an awesome day.
Bye-bye.
See ya.